John, when you're feeling better and testing negative, that you'll come back and talk to us about that. So my job this morning is to convince you that you really do want to come and talk about poetry, because this is amazing. I mean, the more I got into it, though, I was like, we should have been doing this a long time ago. I'd originally, we talked in Worship and Arts about just picking a poet, and kind of delving into their life and the works that meant something to you. And I was having trouble following those directions. So, as usual, I'm over here. And I ended up with a different organizing principle for what I chose to bring you this morning. I'm bringing you poems that I actually remember the first time I read it or heard it read, because I had one of those, something just clicked. And then forever after, that poem is associated for me with that particular insight. So I've brought you, I call them first-time poems, the first time I ... And I brought you 4 of them, and they're all short, but they illustrate different aspects of what poetry can do for us. I started reading serious poetry when I was a teenager. I think it's because my mother liked poetry. She shared some of her books with me. Sarah Teasdale, Edna St. Vincent Millay, May Sarton, And when she passed away 2 years ago, those books came back to me to keep. So a number of them are up there on the altar. I wrote poetry in those days too, but it was really terrible. I didn't bring you any of that. One of my favorite sources was this little paperback published in 1940 called A Pocket Book of Verse, Great English and American Poems. And it's, it's all the classics. Well, up until 1940, and there's been a lot of good poetry written since then, but, and I mean, you can, the reading for this morning, the lo, the winter is past, the rains are gone, and the flowers are, how does it go? The time of the singing of birds has come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. That's in here too, along with a bunch of other biblical poetry. My pencil notations are still in the margin where I wrote, memorized 1962, right? That would have made me just about 15. That was a long time ago. But those first-time poems, they stick with you. Okay, so the first of my woe poems is the well-known sonnet by Percy Bysshe Shelley called Ozymandias. I know you know this. Yeah, okay. But just in case, here it is. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing else remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. That line, look on my works, ye mighty, in despair, and it's there in the sand. I mean, I don't know. The story goes that Shelley was inspired by a statue of Pharaoh Ramses II at the British Museum. Although the poem was published in 1818 and the statue didn't arrive at the museum till 1821, so it's a little bit of a disconnect. But Ozymandias is the Greek name for Ramses II. That's where the name came from. But what the poem did for me as an impressionable teenager was to give me a glimpse of the impermanence of accomplishments and legacies and life, really. I mean, there I was, right on the brink. I had everything ahead of me. There were so many possibilities, I couldn't even decide what I wanted to do. And this poem goes, wonk. In the end, it's not going to last anyway. I went, oh, damn. I mean, really, it's very sobering. And it's the funniest thing. I mean, that poem has, I think, inspired a similar reaction in a lot of people. Shelley himself was not exactly a model life, right? I mean, he died at 29, piloting his own boat through a storm because he thought he could do it. He didn't know how to sail. I think, fathered something like 6 children by some untold number of women. I mean, he just lived 29 years burning the candle at both ends, and yet he could write something like that. I don't know. It's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about. Also sobering was one of my favorite Edna St. Vincent Millay poems, called Lament, published in 1921. Listen, children, your father is dead. From his old coats, I'll make you little jackets. I'll make you little trousers from his pants. There'll be in his pockets things he used to put there, keys and pennies covered with tobacco. Dan shall have the pennies to save in his bank. Anne shall have the keys to make a pretty noise with. Life must go on, and the dead be forgotten. Life must go on, though good men die. Anne, eat your breakfast. Dan, take your medicine. Life must go on. I forget just why. I forget just why. What a poignant expression of grief. I suddenly had this picture of what happens when someone close to you, someone you depend on and who depends on you, dies. I mean, at 15, I had lost a 90-something great-grandmother who lived far away, right? I didn't have any experience with close-in death. And in this poem, I saw not only that it happens, but that if it happens, you have to go on. Especially if you are a single parent. You have to get up in the morning and feed the children. Even if all you want to do is pull the covers over your head and hide, you have to get up and feed the children. My father's favorite word most of his adult life was perseverance. Every night when we said grace together, the family held hands around the table and said grace, and everybody went around and said something they were thankful for. My little sister always said thank you for, and she'd look at her food and whatever was on the plate, because that was an easy recipe, right? And one night, the food hadn't been passed, it was all in the center of the table, and she goes, thank you for where's my hamburger? That became a family joke for years and years and years. But we'd get around the table to my father, and he always said, thank you for perseverance. Because sometimes that's what it takes. You just have to get up and feed the children. And then, gradually it gets easier, but man, at the beginning, you don't always get to choose the challenges that come to you in life. You do get to choose how you respond. So that poem was impactful. So fast forward 40 years or so to the time when I began spiritual explorations in earnest. Oh man, I don't know if you guys remember those days. I was like a sponge. I was just soaking it all in, bring it on. One connection that was particularly helpful for me was the Jesus Seminar. Their books, their talks. I remember being at one of their annual meetings up in Santa Rosa at the old Flamingo Resort, listening to a panel discussion that featured, among others, Marcus Borg, who was an early Jesus Seminar member. I had been particularly impressed with his writing because it was so clear and articulate in a field, religion, that is famous for being vague and undefined. You know, people talk and talk, read and read, you know, write and write and write, and you don't know what the words mean. It makes you crazy. But Marcus, when I use the word spirit, this is what I mean. I mean, just lay it out. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyway, somehow the discussion came around to the use of poetry in church. And this is, you know, some 20, 25 years ago. People were still, we have our liturgy, what do we need poetry for, kind of. And Marcus started to recite a poem that he knew by heart, a poem by Denise Levertov, which we have used more than once. I think you know this one. As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky and water bears them, as hawks rest upon air and air sustains them, so would I learn to attain free fall and float into Creator's Spirit's deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all-surrounding grace. Wow, I thought, what a terrific image. That feeling of letting go, which he calls free fall, and just trusting. It's like that Montaigne quote that I keep using because I love it. There is a power in the universe forever on the side of those brave enough to trust it. All the challenges are right there in a few lines. The fear of what will happen if I let go, the desire to hold on and be in control. I can do this myself. I can do it with my mind. Oh yeah, right, you go. The possibility, though, that you could practice, that you could somehow learn, that you could get better at trusting. Poetry in church. I was sold. That one poem is like, oh yeah, because meaningful words, right? Meaningful words. And then I met Mary Oliver. Yay. Saint Mary Oliver, as some of us call her. I mean, she's just a total gift to those of us who are eternally exploring. One of the first of her poems that I encountered, and it had to have been here in this, somewhere in this context, is the famous Praying. It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot, or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but a doorway into thanks and a silence in which another voice may speak. All her favorite themes are there. Pay attention, be grateful, silence, another voice. I was in awe of how much she conveyed in so few words. I went on to consume Mary Oliver's words like a starving person at a banquet. But Praying is still one of my favorites, and if nobody picks Mary Oliver, but please do if you like her too, I'll come back to her later this summer. So the idea of Poetry Sundays is for you to get to share with us poems that have meant something to you. What did you take away? What have you held on to? Do you hold them differently now than you did when you were younger, maybe when you first encountered them? It's just all about exploring and sharing. We're not trying to prove anything, only that in church we tend to generate a lot of words because we think words are going to get us closer to experiencing God. That turns out actually not to be true, but it doesn't stop us from trying. And it turns out that poetry, because it uses few words, very carefully chosen few words, has a better chance of actually helping you have an insight than the long discourses. I had an interesting experience yesterday. I was part of a memorial service in the morning over at Transfiguration Episcopal. And the service was for a man named Peter Jensen, who had been a long-time Masterworks singer, he and his wife. And they were longtime pillars at Transfiguration, too. So that was the place to have the memorial service. And of course, Jan, his wife, asked Masterworks to come sing for his service. So, the church is filling up from the front, and then the whole back, when the choir, and when it was time to sing, the whole back of the church stood up, and I'm going, oh yeah, Mormon Tabernacle Choir, eat your heart out. I mean, whoa. Because not only is Masterworks a pretty good singing group, but when you sing something that's meaningful for someone that you cared about, it carries all the weight of that emotion. But what it meant was that we all got to participate in a regular Episcopal memorial service. Now, Peter, with no disrespect, because I know you love this ancient liturgy, but I sat there listening going, oh my gosh, just tell me what it means. Because there were words and words upon words and ancient words and words all in the right order and said over. And so for people for whom that is meaningful, hearing the repetition is. For other people looking at it from the outside, just tell me what it means. And I kept thinking, wow, that's why I go to College Heights. Because we've pared down the liturgy to the point that really the only old words we regularly say are the Lord's Prayer, because those are words of Jesus. That's what we're trying to get back to, is how this whole thing started. Well, it's interesting to be reminded every so often that people do things differently, and that's cool, but in the right place. Okay. All right, so that's my poetry contribution. See how easy that is? You just come and read some stuff that you love, and then we all talk about it. So what have you got to say about any of those or any other poetry items? Peppy, here comes the microphone.